Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the studios of Grafton Community Television. It's Meet the Candidate, and I have a guest in studio. His name is Matt Often. He's running for re-election for the Select Board. Welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. How are you today?
Good to have you. I'm doing just fine.
Excellent.
But I'm not running for re-election.
You're not? You're not?
So why don't we give everybody at home a refresher? Why don't you start off with what do you do for a living? What do you do when you're kicking back in your spare time?
Sure. Let's see. What do I do for a living? So I am in technology. I run a global team that is international. We do networks and phone systems and Office 365, all the collaboration tools that make people productive at work. In terms of other stuff, I'm an active in a bowling league. Not very good, but
10 pin?
it's yeah, 10 pin.
Okay.
Yep. So I love bowling. Let's see what else. Love hiking. Being with my son in the Scouts, and lately I've been working on refabbing a motorcycle for my daughter.
Okay. All right. Oh, and you also mentioned you're a former Army reservist.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, I was in the Army Reserves and also the National Guard.
Okay. What did you do?
I did a couple of things. With the reserves, I was a tactical communications officer driver,
Okay.
which was fun. The guy that I drove around, Major Finn, he loved at the end of the weekend in the reserves, you got to fire off all the munitions
Yeah.
because you never want to sign them back in. So he was the guy that would always take me to the range and we'd be able to fire off whatever they had left, which
Fire
was
everything,
fantastic. And then I transitioned into, as I went into college, the National Guard. And in the National Guard, I was a sousaphone player.
Okay.
Lots of parades.
So you were musical. See, when I asked you, musical instruments.
I
and
am
you,
musical.
You completely left out
I can
sousaphone.
play anything brass.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Now bowling.
Mm-hmm.
You got the big hook. You got that down to a science, or
Yes, I have a massive, massive hook. Maybe a little too much these days.
too much hook?
Yep.
But I mean, you can hit the pocket. You don't have to worry
Absolutely.
about the dreaded 7-10 split.
Yep. No, I've been working on it for a couple of years, and it's come along.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. All right. You're running for re-election. If we look back over the last 3 years, what have you learned?
Well, that's a loaded question.
What have you
What have I learned?
liked the most? What have you disliked?
Sure.
Did it meet your expectations? Were you blindsided by anything?
You just asked me 15 questions.
Pick
Let's start with one.
I'll try and remember what I asked in what order.
What have I learned? So some of the things that I've learned, I guess, I ran on public safety and education. I ran on financial transparency, and I ran on collaboration largely. Those were sort of the things that I was interested in bringing to the Select Board. And I've learned a lot about each of those things. With regards to collaboration, I think I bring a lot to the Select Board in terms of mutual respect, having an appreciation for the people on the Select Board with different skill sets and perspective, actually creating the container for collaboration. It's really important to have a level of trust with your fellow board members. So working through with essentially a bunch of strangers, working through that process has been really interesting and really rewarding. And I think what you see today is a pretty functional, effective board that is able to collaborate. We don't always agree on everything. There's lots of 3-2, 4-1, sometimes unanimous votes, but there is a very civil discourse, and it's polite and respectful and professional. So I've learned, a lot about just how to accomplish that with a variety of different types of personalities. You're never quite sure who you're going to get on the Select Board next year, and there could be change this year.
Sure.
So it's this always revolving set of characters and personalities and interests that are on the board. So, so I've learned a little bit about that. I've continued to learn about the budget process. We I was part of the hiring process for Evan Brassard. He's our new town administrator. So he has had a fairly different approach, I think, to budgeting and finances than our previous town administrator. So I've gotten to see a different look and feel on how to provide financial transparency. He has redone all of our chart of accounts, which is no small task. And he's been very good about at least the starting phases of a good capital management program. So the last override brought a dedicated funding source for capital management and the capital improvement program. He's put that to very good use. So I've been very, very pleased with that. I love his put it all out there approach to the budget. You know, if you're interested in anything, any check that we've written, any account, any ins and outs in the budget, you can go right onto ClearGov, look up Grafton, and you can see exactly how every single dollar is spent. It's phenomenal. That level of transparency and just openness with what we're doing from a financial standpoint. That's always probably the biggest issue that people have in terms of who they elect, is how are you going to manage my tax dollar?
We have the transparency because the select board meetings are televised, the finance committee meetings are televised. So if you are so inclined and you're not on the internet, you can sit and watch it all played out in front of you on television. And then you mentioned collaboration. So what do you do when you want to collaborate but somebody else doesn't? How do you also mentioned building trust. How do you get
Yep.
How do you get that to work?
It starts with mutual respect, and people know when you're giving them respect. You can tell by the quality of somebody's comments. You can tell by how someone pays attention to what you're actually saying. I make it a practice to be interested in other perspectives, because I'm rarely the smartest guy in the room. So I always want to, see what else there is out there in terms of ways to think about things and ways that I can learn about, being on the select board, it's complicated. There's it's a broad field of topics that you have to have some technical knowledge on. You've got to have some awareness of how the operations actually work in town, all of the state and federal regulations, the local bylaws and charter. There's a lot of layers to it. So it's important. But, in order to be able to collaborate successfully, I think it starts with being interested in what other people have to say on the board. And at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't want to collaborate, they don't have to. That's their choice. But I think one of the biggest opportunities that you have as a select board member is to have some influence with your other board members and in town with your constituents. And that requires a certain level of interest in other people's perspectives, curiosity, engagement with different types of people. Because at the end of the day, I represent everybody in town, not a group of people. So I need to understand all of the different perspectives on any given topic as best I can. So I think that's where it starts. And then, if somebody isn't interested in collaborating with me, hopefully they'll collaborate with other board members and go that way.
Right. Okay. Someone once told me that in the town of Grafton, the best way to make it to the select board is to start out on any committee and then work your way up to FinCom and then planning board and then eventually work your way to select board.
Sure.
But it appears to me the average voter, that people are just like, I'm going for the big prize. I'm going right to select board. So that doesn't really serve the voters well unless that person is brilliant, because as you say, there's a lot of heavy lifting on select board. Select board looks at all the different topics in town, the budget, and, growth, and all the construction projects.
Yeah.
And I can see, and like you said, we're being concerned about not being the smartest person in the room. That learning curve must be as steep as the Himalayan mountains. I mean, just especially for somebody new coming on board. But here you are, you have the benefit of 3 years under your belt, and so now the next 3 years, should you be elected, should be a breeze, right? You would hope.
No.
No?
I wouldn't think so. Maybe. I hope so. We've had a pretty tumultuous 3 years.
Yeah.
A lot's happened over the last 3 years. We've had an interim town administrator. We hired a new town administrator. Each of them come with their own culture, their own way of doing things, their own priorities. That was a challenge. we have a new fire chief. That when we had to go through 2 rounds of hiring, because the first candidate that we made an offer to didn't take the offer. So we had to go back out, form another search committee, or get it back together, get another round of candidates, and we ended up selecting Chief Matthew, and he's been fantastic. I can't say enough about the guy.
But maybe it doesn't get easier.
It may. I hope it does.
Right. But you could look at an agenda and you could say, okay, been there, done that, been there, done that, and then maybe you make it through half a year, make it through the whole year, and there's only, one thing that causes you to pause a bit and reflect.
I hope so. To go back to your earlier question of what have I learned, one of the really challenging things that just wasn't on my radar at all was appointments, and weighing out how to kind of carefully and properly, with Grafton's best interest in mind, doing appointments. Sometimes you have friends that come up for appointments, and they aren't always the best choice in your estimation, and you've got to navigate those waters. I think it's really important to have a certain amount of diversity, and that can mean lots of different things. It could mean the amount of time you've been in town. It's helpful to have people that are newer in town and people that are been here for a while. Age, is another factor. Race, ethnicity, religious background, culture. There's so many different factors to it. But at the end of the day, in order to represent the broadest community, it's really good to have that type of diversity on there. So that's been a bit of a challenge. Sometimes you want a slightly different perspective on a board or a committee. And so how do you bring, sometimes you've got people that have been on there for quite a long time, and you actually want to move it in a slightly different direction. So how aggressive do you get with bringing new perspective into the, while still trying to have a deep respect for people that volunteer and give their time to the town and are dedicated to these various boards and committees. So, at the beginning of being a select board member, I lost a lot of sleep over a lot of things. That's a lot less now. I feel like I do kind of know what I'm doing. I have been there, done that with a bunch of a range of things. We've been through a couple of budget cycles now. I've gotten used to how the select board interacts with other boards and committees and the town administrator, and I've taken a little bit of a step back personally from some of the day-to-day operations that were happening in the municipal center, and I've tried to have more of a strategic perspective on, because I think that's the unique thing that the select board brings, is lots of experience and a perspective that has the potential for moving Grafton in a positive direction. And I think as we talk about somebody who hasn't been on other boards and committees, that's the one thing that they might lack, in addition to just some of the technical knowledge, but just the vision of how everything goes together and how it might move in the future in a positive way for Grafton. So I'm not sure how far I want to go into this, but just one of the things that I would put out there is I would say that Grafton has a pretty significant need for some analysis and some discussion and some thinking, some good thought leadership around our land use needs. There's, land is limited supply. It's a physical resource that, it has a lot of demands on it in Grafton, between residential housing development, commercial development, trying to preserve open space, the farms and agricultural uses in Grafton. There's a lot of different competing interests that all want that finite resource. So as more and more developments come into town, actually having a good sense of what our priorities are for that land use and how to manage, it's not an either-or situation. We don't have to preserve every bit of land in Grafton. We don't have to develop it all. We don't have to allocate it all towards commercial development and business development. At the end of the day, you've got to have a good mix of all of those things in a way that's sort of fair and equitable for everybody, that provides for some commercial growth, which helps with our tax burden. It provides people places to live, and also provides the type of quality of life that people have come to expect in Grafton. So, and that's where the open space, the passive recreation, fields and parks and that's, that sort of thing come into play.
Balance comes to mind.
It's balance, and if you are only looking at a perspective, if you're only looking at an issue from one perspective, you might not see the other opportunities that you have, which may not impinge on what your priorities are at all, but can benefit the town overall. So it's that sense of balance and making sure that you're understanding everybody's perspective, because at the end of the day, the land use one's a good example. People need places to live, and they don't all need the same places to live. I happen to think that those $1 million things going up on Institute Road, not my cup of tea. But there are people waiting to move into those.
Sure.
There are people waiting to move into apartments and multifamilies and townhouses and all sorts of different diverse types of housing. And even though that doesn't look like my old house, that's okay. These are all places for people to come in to join the Grafton community and be part of our community. My kids are going to play with their kids and go to school with them. I'm going to see them at Town Hall at the town meeting. Going to see them out on the common at the Harvest Fair.
Sure.
All that kind of. These are people that I moved into town myself 20 years ago, so I wasn't always here. And I want to welcome those people in.
So you recently participated in some meetings up at the library where the public attended, all of the select board was there. And do you find that sometimes maybe the message can get lost when there's anger in the room or frustration on the part of the citizens? And
yeah, I think it can get lost a little bit. But one of the things that I've learned on the select board is to not take the anger and the frustration directly or personally. We've had a lot of contentious meetings. I'm also on the Affordable Housing Trust, and we've had some challenging meetings where people bring a lot of energy. And it's most often not particularly positive energy, but it's people having anger and frustration about the things that are deeply important to them. If you can try to discern the message and actually hear what they're saying, try to get underneath the anger. Usually anger isn't about anger. It's about something underneath, right? So what is the root of the concern or the worry? If you can understand those things and start to discern them, that's the learning that you get in a meeting like that. But you have to be able to filter out to a certain extent. There's a bit of showmanship with some people. They really, they come guns blazing, right? And they want to have, sometimes they want to have sort of gotcha moments or sound bites and that sort of stuff. And the whole public service thing and being on camera, it's interesting. It's its own world. And people treat it very differently. So I think there is a lot of learning that comes out of those, but you have to kind of take a non-personal, measured, calm approach to it and really just try to understand, so what are the basic themes of the concern that people have or the thing that they need addressed? And sometimes you can't. Some people they want Grafton to be like it was like a couple decades ago when I moved in.
Right.
It's not, though. Grafton doesn't look like it did when I moved in 20 years ago. But you know what? We have great schools. We have an outstanding public safety system with our fire and police and EMS. The roads have improved since then. Like, Grafton's made some investments, and it shows. It's a significantly different, but I like the town the way that it is now. We have good restaurants in town. We have a very robust set of other businesses that are working, providing important services for people. But it's not the same as when I moved in, and I would never expect it to be like that. So you can't address that person's concern that just wants nothing to change. At the end of the day, the select board, the planning board, conservation, we all have a part to play in trying to do what we can to mitigate negative effects in the community. but none of us can stop development. It's just not, we don't own the land, we don't control the developers, so development is happening and will continue to happen in Grafton. It's more a matter of how you work to try to manage it over time. And that's where planning comes in with their zoning changes. We have to accommodate for the state. They just put in they're basically pushing transit-based housing. So they put in a new MBTA zone, which basically requires that you allow by right a certain amount of development, which is dense development. It's 15 units per acre. So you can imagine on a per acre basis, which there's lots of places in town where they've got 1 or 2 homes. Now they're asking a by right development zone to be created in each of these MBTA communities. So you've got to accommodate for stuff like that. There's a lot to it.
All right, I'm going to give you the last couple of minutes to talk to the voter at home, and that represents the voter right over there. So I'll turn it over to you.
So voters, I hope you have liked what I've done on the board. I think, going forward, some of the things that I'd be interested in is, like I mentioned, land use policy and prioritization, some thought leadership there. I would like to continue promoting our public education and also our public safety. Those, to me, are the 2 linchpins to a good community. If you don't have education and public safety working in harmony, well-funded, modern, you really don't have as good a chance at having the quality community that you want. Let's see, what else? I think you've seen over the last 3 years that I am able to collaborate in a productive way, in a respectful way, in a professional way. That's something that I would continue no matter who ends up on the select board this year, next year, the year after. And I just urge you to come out to vote. It's really important for everybody to get out and be good citizens and to exercise their right to vote. So that's May 16th. Come on out and vote, and I would appreciate your support. Thank you. My name's Matthew Often.
Thank you for coming in. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Bob.
On behalf of all the talented people that work here at Grafton Community Television, you've been watching Meet the Candidate. I'm Bob Dutoma. Thank you for watching.